Howdy, goody go. Welcome to African Experts with Vickie Remoe, the show that brings you African entrepreneurs, practitioners, researchers, and innovators with big ideas and insights on issues shaping African lives. If this is your very first time joining us, Kushe. We're here on Sundays to ask big questions and to learn from African experts and viewers like you. If you're not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure you do so now so you never miss an episode. Here is a quick reminder before we dive into this week's conversation. It is our weekly reminder. This is a live conversation. Should we lose internet connectivity or electricity, please don't leave us. We will be right back. I invite you to engage with each other in the comments and to ask questions. Also, as you're watching, please do share this conversation on your feed. Contrary to popular belief, technology is not free from bias. Whether it's racist programming, like racially targeted ads that offer Black Americans higher interest rate loans, or facial recognition technology that is more likely to give a false reading if you're dark-skinned or female. If unchecked, technology amplifies and normalizes existing biases and inequity. One key reason for this is that the tech bros leading the latest advancements in machine learning and artificial intelligence often do so in a bubble with other tech bros, and the vicious cycle of white supremacist, sexist, and exploitative profit-first systems are perpetuated. And even when flags are raised and questions asked, like AI ethics leader Timnis Gebru recently did in a paper with other scholars titled, "On the Dangers of Stochastic Parrots, Can Language Models Be Too Big? Tech Bros Fight Back." Google fired Gebru for challenging the values of language processing over the costs. Language processing makes it possible for computers to recognize language, classify it, and allow humans to interact with computer-powered search engines, translation, and transcription services, etc. Computers can now write papers and essays, and they can talk to us, like we already do, to Siri and Alexa. Language processing is bridging the communication gap between computers and humans. Today's conversation, I'm talking to a language processing expert. We're going to explore the costs of big data, the haves and have-nots of AI, and his work using transfer learning to process Ghanaian languages to make it possible for Africans to communicate with computers in Zulu, Lingala, Ewe, or Mandingo with the same ease and level of access that allows speakers of resource-rich languages like French, English, and Spanish to do today. But now, we'll take a short break for a word from our sponsor, your favorite children's book, Adama Loves Akara, which is currently available in Sierra Leone, Ghana, and online from Amazon.com. You're watching African Experts with Vickie Remoe. You're watching African Experts with Vickie Remoe. Welcome back. Let's meet our guest, African expert Paul Azunre. Paul is a machine learning scientist, a mathematician, software developer, music producer, and hip hop artist. And if you're following him on Instagram, a really good soccer player. He is an experienced principal investigator and a computer science expert who has participated in several research programs for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, at the United States Department of Defense. DARPA is responsible for the development of emerging technologies for use by the US military. He's the founder of Algorand Inc., a research lab spun out of MIT to advance basic AI, machine learning, and optimization research for high social impact applications. Algorand develops cutting edge optimization and machine learning algorithms for design optimization in optics, routing, TSP, solar, wind, etc. He also serves as director of research at Dun and Bradstreet, a company helping businesses manage supply chain risk and other business analytic challenges. Paul has a Bachelor of Science in Engineering and a Bachelor of Arts from Economics from Swarthmore College, yes, TRICO. He also holds a Master's of Science in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science from MIT, where he completed his PhD in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. Paul is also the co-founder of Ghana Natural Language Processing, NLP, an open source initiative focused on using NLP and transfer learning with Ghanaian and other low resource languages. He's the newly published author of Transfer Learning for Natural Language Processing. His book explores use cases that use transfer learning to adapt existing state-of-the-art models into real-world applications, including building a spam email classifier, a movie review sentiment analyzer, an automated fast checker, and for the purposes of this show, a question answering system and a translation system for low resource languages. Paul's book, Transfer Learning for Natural Language Processing, is available from Manning Publishing, manning.com, that's with Manning with two N's, in ebook format, and print. Paul, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me, Vickie. That was a very nice introduction.
I still can't believe that we were both in TRICO at the same time, me at Haverford and you at Swarthmore, and of like the two, I wouldn't even say, like, African students on those campuses are so small, and I truly felt like I knew everyone. I can't believe we had mutual friends and like had no idea and never met, and then here we are.
Yes, in those days, I was living the life of, I guess, a crazy scientist, hiding in a room with a book, and I definitely had fun, sometimes on the soccer field and sometimes at the parties, but it was very structured,
I see. Okay. Well, at least you definitely were busy. You had a lot of work to do. So I totally understand if you weren't at the parties where I was or on the green.
Well, nice to meet you finally.
Right. No, absolutely. I'm really glad to have you because this last year, so much has happened with AI and machine learning and just like controversy. So my first question to you is it possible to have machine learning language processing models that are free of bias? If not, where do we put the warning label, alerting consumers and institutions that, hey, your standard tech bro Aura created this and it hasn't been checked and can't be checked for racism, sexism, or other social isms, so use at your own risk? How do we do that?
I think one way of answering that question is put the warning label on everything. That's one way of answering it, because if you really think about how this process emerges, you begin to understand that it's kind of emergent from the way the current economic system is constructed, all the reward systems in it, and just the inequality that we have in our societies, right? So so these technologies tend to amplify all of that, right? And that risk is always there. And to answer the question another way, yes, it is possible to have it, but it's not something that will happen on its own. It has to be an active process where all of us have to participate in the process of making sure that these systems do not have that bias. This is why people talk about diversity, right? This is why people say you need people on your team representing all the groups so that, if, you know, you you mentioned the case of the vision recognition, the face recognition system. If there was a black woman on the team that built this, obviously should have tested it on herself and told them, guys, it doesn't work. But because they were all from homogeneous, from the same group,
Right.
nobody even thought
Yeah.
about it. As far as they were concerned, it was working, right? So let's go make the money.
Right.
So,
Right.
and if I may say another thing, we should also realize that this is not something that's unique to, say, America, where we have a certain type of bias going on, right? It, if we are not careful, we will just import the same thing and amplify the biases existing in our own societies, right? And there are a lot of those. Like a homogeneous country like Ghana, right? I come on here with dreadlocks, and I think you know where this is going. Like
I do.
when I come home and I ride in the city in the car, we get stopped pretty frequently. And we get checked for contraband by the cops pretty frequently. Of course, they say it's random, but if you do the math, it's not random, right? They think that I'm a criminal because I have dreadlocks. So what would happen if this same policeman were given the power to build a computer vision system to catch criminals? What do you think is going to happen? They are the ones who are going to label the data that this is a criminal and this is not a criminal. So basically, everybody with dreadlocks will get stopped, right? Not because they're a criminal, because a criminal probably would have cut their dreadlocks, knowing all this. But because that's the bias that they have, and so they will just inject it into the system, and the system will productize it. Yeah.
I think it's really.
So yeah, put the label on everything and be very careful.
It's really great to hear you say that. I think one of the things that social media perhaps has done, search engines, because these have become like daily consumables, almost as easy or simple as breathing or talking or flipping on a light switch, that a lot of us, when we use these products, we're not really thinking about our risks, right? The risks, we're not talking about the risks of using the products and the technology that are based on the inherent problems within the technology because of the people creating them. We tend to focus more on the content that we put on. Like, so if I don't share a certain kind of content, then I'm protected, right? So we focus more on like what we're putting into the system and not the biases or issues that are structurally designed within. So yeah, okay, fine. I guess it's like point number one. If you're going to use any kind of technology, be aware that these systems have their own biases. Use at your own risk. I think that's a really good place to start. Okay. Yeah. So, and you've already started us on the way on this conversation. So it's great because my next question is around what happened with Timnus. If AI ethics leaders like Timnus Gebru can be so easily pushed out where they could potentially do the most good, where will the checks and balances come from as big data goes beyond the resources available to check for these kinds of biases and inaccuracies?
So I think, and there are a lot of opinions on this, but I think that we are the checks and balances. What do I mean by that? So within, let's say, the context of the American society or the Western society, what we are seeing right now is playing out a power struggle between community leaders like Timnit Gebru and people who believe the way things are done right now can't continue, and the people who have so much power in this space, right? So we are actually seeing it play out. But we do have a democracy. We can make laws, right? But the laws won't happen if we don't vote, if we don't organize, right? If we don't, organize around these topics and get people excited to participate in the process, right? So the one way to do it is through the government, right? And through the legal frameworks. Of course, there are risks with that. With everything, it's a balance, right? Too much regulation might hurt, creativity and innovation, right? So we want to do it carefully. We want to do it properly, but we've seen that we need it done. And we literally have I do not. I'm not an American citizen, so I can't vote. But a lot of people who agree with us have the power to change things, right? Just by simply by participating in the political process, right? That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is still us. We need to build the enterprises that are going to do things correctly. We need to build enterprises that are going to look out for, ways that these systems could hurt us, right? And we need to show society that things can be done better than they're being done today. Because one reason why people, why these things perpetuate is because we have this images of this, typically white men who, make all this money, and they do it in this, cruel and way that they don't care about anybody. They screw people along the way, and that's okay because everybody for himself. That entire attitude, which was perpetuated by, the movies and the books and all this stuff. It's just right. So people think, oh, if I want to amass power and be influential, then this is how I have to act, and this is who I have to be, right? So we have to show them that that's not true, right? That you could be somebody else. You can do things in a more empathetic way and still be successful. Maybe, and without all this hurt, right? So we need to build the enterprises, and these enterprises could serve as checks and balances as well, right? So if we build systems that, say, help with detecting bias in data sets and stuff like that, right? This will all help improve the ecosystem. So let's all participate in it and not just throw our hands up and say, oh, all is lost. We can make it better.
Right. Now, I think for a lot of people, when you think of like the big tech companies, Cisco, Google, et cetera, all of these like enterprise solution providers, it does sometimes feel like they have so much wealth and so much resources that like what's the point, right? You can't fight a Google. They are the search engine. But yes, I really agree that, something that this issue between Google and Timnus is starting to show is that actually a very small group or community of people can, if not transform the industry, educate enough consumers and enough people who are not in the industry to be armed with the knowledge so that they feel empowered enough to engage, and they also understand why the work is important, right? And then it then goes back to, okay, well, do we need to talk to our regulators so that they can do more in terms of oversight and guidelines to tech companies so that they're less biased, right? So like some kind of self-check. And you've worked sorry, go ahead.
So I wanted to just say something about that, just to tie into the point of doing things ourselves. To make another example, say Google Translate, you mentioned Google, that doesn't have any Ghanaian languages. For a while, I think a lot of Ghanaian people would try to say, tag Google on Twitter and tag Twitter. When Twitter came to Ghana, people were tagging Twitter and saying, please build us a translator, right? But really, we should be building our own, because once we build the systems, these systems are going to have a lot of power associated with them, right? And this power, the only way we can make sure that this power that's really, is how we are going to reduce the bias, is that the power is in local hands.
Right.
So in the hands of the communities that might be impacted by it, right?
You're just trying to mess up my question flow, because that literally was my next. Please, Charlie, I beg, slow down for us. So that was actually my next question, which was, what did you notice within the institutions or just the industry that you're working in, machine learning and AI? What inequities did you notice that made you launch Ghana Natural Language Processing? So you can take us through more specifically what you were already just speaking to.
Yes. So if you look at any, say, Google Translate, you will find that it doesn't have any Ghanaian languages. Most of the translation systems, and of course, it makes it easy to say you can't say use it for all these applications. But it's even deeper than that. Our presence on the digital space is, today is indispensable, and it's actually the way we participate in, this process. As I've been speaking to voices, because let's say a lot of the models nowadays are trained on the internet. To make a simple example, and if there are not a lot of resources in your language on the internet, then basically you don't count in this democratic process, if you view it that way. So you have to put this material out there so that you are at the table. If humanity got erased and the aliens came to look for traces of us, they may look for libraries where the books are. And they may also look at the hard drives and the World Wide Web and all of that stuff. And if we are not in it, then it's like we were not here.
Never existed.
Right. So our culture and who we are has to be preserved. It has to be digitized, and it has to be secured for the future. And so this is what Ghana NLP is about.
So with Ghana NLP, you're trying to basically solve one of the issues that Gebru actually raised in that paper that Google didn't like very much, which is that, yes, the majority of language data being used for NLP leaves out languages that aren't yet resourced or currently under-resourced. How are African machine learning scientists responding to this inequity? And what are some of the noteworthy projects being done across the continent to put African languages on the NLP map? So besides Ghana NLP, what else? What are the projects are out there that people are doing that you find really fascinating?
So I think there are a lot. We are by far not the only group working in this space. In fact, we were inspired by a group called Ethio NLP to form. So Ethiopian NLP, and Timnit is probably involved with that. I'm not sure, but probably.
Or they're inspired by her, definitely, because she's of Ethiopian ancestry, I believe.
Right. Yeah. But we, saw Ethio NLP and the work they were doing at the Black in AI conference, and we didn't see that happening for Ghanaian languages, and that's pretty much how the group formed. So Ethio NLP is a big one. There's a group called Masakani now that does a lot of good work in this space. One of the biggest names now. There are a lot of organizations investing money in the group in this area, from AI for development to GIZ, which is the German agency. The African data science competition platform, Zindi, is running a lot of competitions to inspire students to write code for these problems, which are not worthy efforts that need to be mentioned. We actually contributed to some data sets to that. Ghana NLP did. And yeah, there are a lot of local groups in East Africa, in Kenya, Niger NLP, and there's a new one every day. So it's actually people are getting interested in the problem. It's very exciting to see.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I feel like we got a little tech delay there, but I think we're back. Cool. No, it's really great to hear that there is all this activity going on. I think, unfortunately, what happens is that because the media, a lot of times in our local countries, journalists don't necessarily always have the basic tech knowledge to report on these communities. It's oftentimes missed. We don't even know these communities exist or that this work is being done. So I'm glad to hear that there is an Africa NLP community that's growing, and it seems like they're regional hubs. So that's exciting. We're going to take a short break, and we will be right back with more from Paul.
You're watching African Experts with Vickie Remoe. You're watching African Experts with Vickie Remoe.
Welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us, you're watching African Experts, and I'm Vickie Remoe. With me on the show today is machine learning expert Paul Azunre, and we're talking about artificial intelligence inequities, natural language processing, and big data costs. Paul, your new book, Transfer Learning for Natural Language Processing, amongst many other things, covers how transfer learning can be used to create a translation system for low-resource languages. What are some of the other use cases for NLP for African languages that you think will positively impact service delivery for citizens at the last mile?
So I think the most important one I can think of right now is the voice applications. So automatic speech recognition coupled with speech generation. So to make it simple, Siri, right? So it can listen to you, understand what you're saying, and then communicate with you in speech. This is important because you have people, a lot of illiterate people who are locked out from using and benefiting from all these advances, who now don't have to know how to read, don't have to know how to speak some foreign language. They just need to speak the language they were born in, and they can talk to the devices. And this can simplify their life gives them a job. They can navigate GPS, they can go places, they can interact with foreigners, so that would be huge.
No, that as you're speaking,
many more though.
No, as you were just speaking, I was just thinking about Sierra Leone during COVID-19, right? Last year at the start of the pandemic, the government launched like a SMS and USSD services for people to be able to get information around like a COVID-19 self-check, checking your symptoms, or just like information to fact check information around COVID-19. Now, it's great, but as you just said, for a lot of people, Sierra Leone's literacy rate is about like 50%. And so for a lot of people, though, even if you do have smartphones, right, even if you can access certain technology, at the end of the day, if you're not literate, it doesn't help. I have friends who always talk about being in WhatsApp groups with like older generations, and it's all voice notes. So in the WhatsApp groups, because of this literacy barrier, it's voice notes, and they're always joking about how you can't, like, it literally will be like somebody, like I had a Fulani friend talking about being in a family group with all of these Fulanis, and most of the people in her family are literate, right? Extended family. And so it literally would be morning voice notes of people saying Injarama in Fulani, and somebody else responding and saying, well, how are you? How are the family? How are the kids? And saying hello. And everybody just like responding at the same time in Fulani by language, because, most of them are illiterate. And so, yes, when I heard about the work that you were doing, I was really thinking about service delivery, right? So for example, government needing to send information to farmers, or people who are, health information, agriculture, just people who usually in our communities don't have the same access to education, and so grew up being outside of out of reach, or, medical diagnosis, or just giving people like the empowerment to really participate in the world without having to go through middlemen, right? And yes, I also think it's as a question of dignity, when you go online and you can like have your natural birth language translated for you, or part of the library of languages that are available for use on the internet, you do feel seen, and it is a question of dignity. You feel like you two are important like some English person, or you two are important like some French person. So I do think it matters so much in so many different ways. And of course, that's why we had you on the show.
The good news is it's not going to take 10 years to get there. In fact, it's going to be out, I predict 2. So we already built the Akan. We are testing it now. So you can speak to it and it understands what you're saying. We are yet to generate text, because that takes more data, but it's not so much more data that we can't get there. And I just finished training in Yoruba. You only need a couple hours of speech now due to recent advances in transfer learning. So we are participating in it, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more coming out very soon. So stay tuned.
No, that's really exciting. I mean, and are you saying this is like going to be two-way? So meaning I can talk in my natural language and the program will also respond to me in speech in my natural language. So it will talk to me like Siri talks or like Alexa talks.
So generating speech is harder than recognizing it. So you only need nowadays a couple hours of transcribed speech to recognize it. So we've done that. That's easy. We are doing it, expanding the language set. Generating text takes about, let's say, 24 hours with the methods we have right now. So that's harder. We don't have 24 hours of transcribed Lacan. We have maybe 4. So we may have to do, but 4 is, 5 times less. We may be able to record. We've had people in our group who, because they want the system to sound like them, right? There's a reward. They are willing to do it for free, right? So there are people recording it now. So I hope we get there. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, as you're talking also, I mean, you just talked about having 4 hours and needing like 24 hours of recorded language. One of the things that again, I keep going back to this paper, which I didn't even read. I only read the piece on like MIT Tech Review on the paper because the paper isn't published.
It's published now. It's published now.
Oh, it is published? Okay. And so are the benefits and potential impact for African NLP bigger than the cost, specifically the environmental impact? And I was wondering if transfer learning can offset some of this impact.
So yes, transfer learning can offset the impact, but I want you to recognize that we are already suffering from the impact of the environmental impacts of these technologies, even though we are not benefiting from them as much yet, because the effects of the environmental impacts are not localized to the places that benefit, right? It's a global thing. It upsets the whole thing. So we are already paying, even though we are not benefiting. Transfer learning reduces those costs because all transfer learning says is, don't learn things from scratch. So the way like a little boy is not going to have to learn, if they already knew how to play baseball and you ask them to play cricket, it's very likely that they'll very quickly pick it up, right? So you're not going to have to learn from scratch. You already know how to hit the ball. You may have to learn some rules. So to make it easier. So transfer learning just says, do that. Your machine should be doing that. It shouldn't have to train everything from scratch. What that means is that you're training for shorter, it's less expensive, less gases are emitted, and so it's better for everybody. So it mitigates it. The companies still want to keep pushing big models. So even with transfer learning, it's still a huge model. And that's what the paper you referred to was the point they were trying to make, and that we should be spending more resources on smaller models that are more efficient, things that can benefit, smaller nations and language groups.
Right.
You saw how that ended up. But yeah, the struggle is ongoing.
But what gets me is that, like, why are they interested? Like, I don't understand, right? Like, in my mind, right, if you're thinking about having a global marketplace, like a truly global marketplace, it must be of benefit, right? Maybe it's a long-term benefit, right? The more inclusive you are, the more customers you have, right? If you're creating solutions for as many people as possible. So yes, okay, Yoruba is however many million people, Ewe and Fulani are however many million people. And yes, you're creating all of these different smaller models that ultimately you're creating more people to come and consume this product. Why is it not seen through that lens? Like, why are like big tech companies so married to this bigger is bigger model? Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, when you start doing this stuff, it makes sense. like if you put an app, we have an app on the Google Play Store that's shown to that has the translators Twi, Ewe, Ga now. We'll be expanding to other African languages, both in Ghana and outside for trade purposes soon. If you look at the, like say the ad revenue that comes from when a Ghanaian looks at it versus when someone, it's so desperate that it's almost insulting. I'm talking about like 10 to the 3, like 1,000 times more valuable than, and I mean, I guess they trace it to what that person, the disposable income, and whether they're likely to buy a product, right? But you are right. It's a very short-sighted view, because if you invest, especially with the current demographics going, Africa is going to be their place to do business very soon. So it's very short-sighted. But I view it as an advantage. Remember, in the beginning, we said we want to be at the table. We want to be the ones building these tools, not them, right? Because if you let them build it, it's their biases we are going to be consuming. If we build it, at least we have some power to check it, right? So as far as I'm concerned, I'm okay with it, because that gives us room to build tools ourselves, you know, before they show up here and try to make $1 off of us. Let's make sure we have them set up, you know, so we can fight back. So we have some leverage in the conversation, right?
No, I guess I didn't think of it that way, in terms of them not, big tech companies not being as inclusive, creates the opportunities then for us to create our own solutions, which is usually how a lot of innovation starts, right? As a response to a problem. So you find out that the thing that you want, the language that you want to use, isn't freely accessible, and you decide that you're going to then create your own platform. You're going to develop your own solution. And in that way, I guess it makes the like global balance of power maybe a little more fair, because you're like, well, we don't have to worry about Google or some other large company coming and taking up the space, right? Like in terms of like dominating, having some kind of hegemony in African countries or across the global South, that because they're not thinking of us and not building solutions and applications for us, you know, technologists like you then can be those people who then become, I don't know, like multi-billion-dollar, you know, multi-billion-dollar tech entrepreneurs, because you're creating solutions for us, right? For a continent that is huge and has the youngest population, et cetera. Where do you get like funding? Like who is funding the natural language processing work on the continent? Is it all volunteer? Like, are you guys just like, we need this, so we're just going to put in these hours? Like, where is the financing coming from?
So it depends on the organization doing the work. So recently there was a Lacuna fund that is like something in Switzerland. They want to fund African language development. And so they gave money to a bunch of groups, including Ashesi and Masakane and others. We submitted proposals. They didn't think it was interesting. But we took that as an opportunity to change our funding model. So so the answer is it depends on the group.
Okay.
I can speak to what we are doing, which is we are trying to let these tools pay for themselves, basically. So a self-sustaining system where, like right now, we show some ads in our apps, which are free for everyone to use. And so the hope is that the revenue that comes from that will be sufficient to pay for the servers. And if anything is left over, we can reinvest it into developing more solutions. So that's the goal.
Okay. Is there like commercially, I mean, as you're talking, this is just like a random thing that popped into my head. Say, for example, for mobile phone companies that have these like call centers, or banks that have millions of subscribers. Like I'm thinking about just, you know, like for example, I think MTN's market share in Ghana is like 50 something percent, has 17 million subscribers, right? Most of those people are not using smartphones, or I don't know what they're using, right? And in Nigeria, I think it's like 58 million MTN subscribers. And you have people who are calling into call centers all the time. Can NLP, like the kind of work you're doing, can you develop applications that could potentially then, I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but take the human out of the equation so that when people call, instead of talking to like a call center person, they're talking to, a bot that you programmed to speak Ewe or Akan to communicate. Is that like a potential revenue stream for you?
It is. It actually is. So one thing to say is you never taking the human completely out. I don't think modern techniques are able to do that. You reduce how much they participate. So you may route it, and there are some cases you're sure what they said. There'll be some cases you will never know. Even in the most high resource languages, a human is going to have to address that case. So when the humans are never going, so don't be afraid of that. In fact, this is going to create jobs, more jobs. It's a multiplier effect on how productive the human being can do. If we make sure, of course, how we share the wealth, all of that has to be discussed, right? And we can't just copy what other people did. But at the end of the day, it should help all of us. And yes, we are currently looking for sponsors. We are looking for collaborations. We've had ideas from, GIS enabling disabled people, whether they're blind or in some other way disabled, to interact with technology, which is more like a humanitarian, not like a profit motive. And then we've had some conversations about perhaps, call centers, chatbots, even WhatsApp-based solutions to some specific market segments. It takes a while to set these things up. So the technology just came out. We are testing it. We are going to be releasing it in our app so that you'll be able to download it. Within a couple of weeks, you should be able to download it on your iPhone or your Android device and speak and then get it recognized. And then we are also making an API available so that, and we are working closely with some organizations to incorporate that API into processes. Now, remember we said, let's be careful because this is new technology. Transfer learning has its own risks because you're copying, you're starting with a model you didn't build. What is in it, right? So we are doing it and trying to do it in a very consciously careful, steady way instead of just like, opening it up and having all the stuff explode and not providing support for people to use it because the people at the applied side might not know all of these risks and stuff. So we are working closely with people, and hopefully next year, when we, if we chat, I'll be able to tell you that the revenue has started and on the way.
I'll be watching. You don't even have to tell me. I will see your tweets. I will see your posts. When people come into money, you can't hide prosperity. When prosperity is abound, it shows in everything. So you won't need to come and tell me. I will know based on the Ghana NLP tweets and activities and virtual champagne popping. We will know that
all the money from Ghana NLP goes back into Ghana NLP though. So
which is fantastic.
Just to make that clear. Yeah. It's not like it's not going in my pocket. Yeah.
Sure.
I'll probably still be poor, so okay. I'll still might ask you for a drink or.
No, it works. Okay, so you started talking about this earlier, and I really want to, and you were just referencing it again. And before we left here, I wanted to cover this. Will NLP in Ghana perpetuate the same biases and inequities that exist in this society around ethnicity, regions, and gender? And what are you doing to not create or repeat big, tech bros issues in NLP in Ghana? And is this something that we also have to worry about?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If we just take what has been done somewhere else and just replicate it, we are going to see the same outcome. And as we already discussed in this show, there are a lot of biases in the Ghanaian society that have nothing to do with race, right? Whether it's hair, whether it's religion, whether it's gender, sexual orientation. There's a lot to unpack there, right? So that stuff will just be amplified if we are not careful. So the way to address it, I think, is just diverse workforce. and open participation, right? So if your group has members from all the areas, then that's one way to make sure that, say, the northern languages are not left behind the southern languages, which is a risk, because even in our own app right now, we don't have any northern languages. Why? Because there's no data out there. So whenever there was any money to create data, that money was spent on the southern languages, Twi, Ga, and to a lesser extent, Ewe, that actually came from, the countries on that side of, Togo and stuff. So if we are not careful, we will just basically repeat the same thing. So we are trying to make it more inclusive, trying to bring in people from all the regions, and we have them. Trying to raise money for those kind of initiatives. It's tough, but we persist, and the risk will always be there, and perhaps we may not achieve this 100%, but we definitely, as someone said, die trying.
That's right. Because intention is everything, right? That if you are, first of all, aware that these problems can exist, these inequities can exist, and that you're at risk of perpetuating the same biases, that already, I feel like that puts you better off than somebody who's potentially denying that it exists, right? Or trying to perpetuate it. So this is a flawless solution, because you're just going to be more cautious, right? Your approach, you're going to ask more questions, which I think is the most important thing. And you're going to approach your work from a place of empathy, right? Where you're like, okay, well, who are really the end users? Who are we? What kind of impact are we actually going to make? And how far reaching will this impact be? So I totally agree with you. And of course, my last question always is about future outlook. I know you said it's in 2 years, but I'm going to give you a decade. In the next decade, what can we expect to come out of Africa's machine learning NLP community that you think will make the most impact on the continent?
Again, voice technologies. Impact on education and impact on accessibility for not fortunate people with disabilities. This is something that I think our society hasn't thought enough about, but this technology will enable a lot of that kind of work to happen. And in fact, I would say since we released the API or the news of the Akan API, most of the discussions we've had were around education and accessibility for the disabled. So that encourages me that because now, like with transfer learning, a kid with just a little support, one kid can actually build a model, right? They may not be able to deploy it all the way, but they can build a model and already begin to change the world in a little way. And I expect that to accelerate. So within 10 years, all of that will be accessible, and then you'll be talking to all your devices in all your local languages that you care about. You will talk to it. You will travel to the next African country, you talk to it, and then it will talk to the person over there in their local language. Then you can do your trade, maybe when you couldn't do it before. And so the opportunity is there. The opportunity, it's boundless. Like anywhere you look, pretty much. There's a lot of it, so there's no need to step on each other and be mean and compete with elbows. There's a lot to do and a lot of impact to be had, and I can't wait for it. As you can see, I'm very excited.
No, I'm very excited with I'm equally as excited, and I'm not even in this space at all. You don't even know the amount of prep I have to do these kinds of shows, because it's so above my it's so above my day to day. But as you mentioned that, I was actually thinking, because a couple of weeks ago we had a guest on here from the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement, AFTA, talking about this integrated Africa, one Africa market. And we all know that key issues already, with access are issues of digitization on the continent, but also language, right? If I leave Ivory Coast and I speak Bambara and I go to Northern Ghana and I speak Hausa, I'm going to be lost, right? And if you're saying that what we can look forward to is the kind of Nkrumah-esque, at least by way of language, right? Nkrumah-esque spirit of connectivity and, Pan-Africanism, where we can go across and communicate and build stronger bonds and a better understanding with other Africans. I'm here for it. Like, yes, I have been lost. I will tell you the story really quickly before we sign off. Once I was traveling by road through Senegal, and I stupidly believed that because I could speak French, it would guide me and help me, and I'd be able to communicate with everybody in Senegal. And then I left Dakar and took a bus from Dakar to Kai, which is in southern Mali. And somewhere along the way, I got kicked off my bus by 2 Senegalese police officers, and I was left in the middle of the road. Then I had to get on a bike with this guy, and then he drove me and told me he would take me to the border, leaves me in the middle of the road, and I had to hitchhike on like an 18-wheeler truck with 3 drivers who didn't speak a word of French, of course, because this is in a place called Tambacounda on the way to the border. And I remember trying to hitch a ride to explain in my French that my bus had left me and the way they looked at me like I was speaking an alien, like they had never even heard French before in their lives. And then it dawned on me that if I could not speak Wolof or Bambara there was nothing. So in the end, I ended up doing sign language, just pointing to my tickets and doing like vroom, 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 bus, border.
Wow. Well, we are trying to build an app for that. So it's called Kaya. Check it out. And maybe a couple years from now you can try that again and see how much easier it is.
Inshallah. I hope, but I don't think I'm taking those risks anymore. Like now I'm like, I need a local to come with me because there are just certain experience that I don't think that at my age I have the, when you're in your 20s, you just have like a different, like, oh, I can do this, like false sense of confidence. And now I know better. So I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for making the time to come on the show. I really I think I forgot to ask if there are any questions. Let me just ask my producer. Are there any questions for Paul about natural language processing and his work or his book, Transfer Learning? No, perfect. This is great. There are no questions, which means that you did such a brilliant job of explaining, and I did such a fantastic job of asking the questions that everyone who's watching is like, we got this. So again, thank you so much for coming on the show. And with that, we've come to the end of today's African Experts. I'd like to thank the production team at vrcmarketing.com, Sierra Leone's leading media production, communication, and online marketing agency. Thank you to the entire team in Freetown and here in Accra. Frank Vin, Bob McEwen, Abdul Hamid Kanu, Alassane Kargbo, Salwa Kamara, and Augustine Kargbo. And of course, thank you to Paul and all of you across the continent and in the diaspora for tuning in. For more information about this and other episodes of African Experts, please visit us at africanexperts.net. Our quote from today comes from Ruha Benjamin, who is a professor of African American Studies at Princeton University and the author of Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code. If inequity is woven into the very fabric of our society, it's everywhere. Then each twist, coil, and code is a chance for us to weave new practices, politics, and patterns. Until next week, unatenki and tata from all of us here at African Experts. See you next Sunday.
Thank you. Bye.